Hi, I'm Sophie Lampard Dennis. I'm an associate professor in the education department at Landmark College. I'm in my 18th year teaching here. I primarily teach first year studies courses and electives within the first year studies department, and I'm a Wilson certified reading specialist as well.
And I'm Dottie Osterholt, and I work in the education department as well here at Landmark College as a founding faculty. I've spent much of my career working with first semester students entering Landmark for the first time, and in addition to that, I've also taught students in intro to education courses and other related education courses. We're talking today about our theory that is based on 4 domains of learning. And I'd like to share a little bit background information that helps explain where the theory came from. So our original research was conducted in 2009. And what we were looking at that point were student engagement. And we were trying to answer questions related to what was preventing first semester students from engaging fully in the academic program at the level that they needed to be academically successful. That original research led us to understand a complex model of learning. And within that complex model, we teased out 4 domains that students must manage on some level in order to be academically successful and be able to sustain that success. The 4 domains that we teased out start with motivation, and motivation focuses on the desire to get tasks done. Social emotional realm, which is our second realm up here, that has to do with the emotional state a student is in that is related to an educational environment or a task. The self-regulation at the bottom quadrant there, that has to do with the ability to plan, to organize, to maintain a level of willpower to get academic tasks done in particular. And then academic skills refer to those skills, the knowledge and skills that are required for reading, writing, and thinking at the college level.
So we also did follow-up research in 2012, and with the follow-up research, we were looking to marry what we call explicitly designed instruction in the classroom to the 4 domains of learning and begin to essentially design instructional activities around the concepts of the 4 domains. From both sets of research that we did, we ended up in 2012 developing this wheel. And the wheel is a framework that we developed as a comprehensive tool to represent the whole student. We created it as a circle to show that it is a dynamic, fluid framework, not static at any time. It represents the whole student. The world of learners is in the center there. It's a model that encourages interaction. So interaction between who, right? Between whom? Between the student and the professor, between students in large groups, between students in small groups, between advisors, professors, and students, and most recently, even parents. So Dottie has worked lately with parent groups here at Landmark College in which parents and students have been able to sit down together and use the wheel in an interactive model to begin to sort of discover the strengths and challenges of the student. One of the most important things that we're trying to establish with this particular design is that learning is complex. And so many students who have struggled in school and come to Landmark College are beating themselves up because they have this sense that it should be so simple, I should be able to do it. Why am I not able to meet my potential as a student? And so they've heard, unfortunately, they've been the recipients of terrible sorts of labels such as being lazy, such as not trying hard enough. And what happens for students often when they are presented with this model is that they realize that actually learning is complex. Meeting your potential as a student has many movable parts beyond just sort of showing up for class and doing your homework. And one of the things that one of the ways that students interact right away with this model is to feel relief, actually. They can look at this model and they can say, oh, you know, I have to have some level of adequate control in 4 areas. Academic skills is on the world of learners, and this is the area that most professors are spending most of their time sort of in the classroom, right, thinking about and delivering academic information. But in fact, there are 3 other domains that are equally important. And when students come to Landmark and they look at this model, they realize, you know, no wonder I'm having such a tough time showing what I know. I'm struggling in several of these areas.
The other thing that's really interesting is when students self-reflect on where their barriers are to the learning process. Most students look at these 3 domains as barriers, and academic learning is not the domain that they go to first. And that was a real eye-opener through the research for us, because then we realized right away that in order to address any of the academic skill problems students might be having in the class, that we need to first look at what's going on in motivation or what's going on in social emotional realm in order to get them to a place where they can begin to feel comfortable in the learning environment or with the learning task and move forward and sustain that motion.
Right, and so the way that we work with students on this most frequently is with the language assessing and addressing barriers to learning. And this is also the way that we work with professionals such as yourself who are working with students who may be at risk, who are struggling, is addressing challenges and barriers has to start really with assessing them. And the student, him or herself, really needs to be in on the assessment. And so what we've provided with this model is the language necessary for all of the stakeholders who are working with the student, including the student, to be able to begin to identify, assess, and then create an action, and then address the barriers with shared language. And so when advisors and professors and parents and the student and even counselors are sharing language, then the student has really a roadmap for sort of a positive direction to move. And the movement of this wheel is, when Dottie and I first created the wheel, I have to share with you, we had this fun idea of creating a movable wheel with a brad clip in the middle, right? We kind of had the idea of creating a wheel in which you could spin the different pieces around and sort of lay over filtered colors and sort of see different pieces at different times and move them. So there is meant to be movement to the wheel, but the primary movement for students is from the internal ring, where students may be experiencing barriers, where they may be feeling stuck, to the outer ring where the success attributes are. And so we have really robust conversations in class, usually following work around mindset theory, around locus of control, and other educational models of learning, in which students discuss, what does this outer ring student who's got all of these positive attributes and control look like? Where am I within the places of being stuck, and where do I want to move to the outer ring so that I can show what I know and meet my academic potential?
I think the power of the model being presented in the way it is the fact that we have taken known practices, known theories that are out there in education, and sort of distilled them down into a workable model. And we gave we gave behaviors names, so that often students will be able to identify their behavior, but they won't be able to name it in any helpful way.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more of a vague concept to them. And when they look at the language on here, it gives them a starting point in which to identify behaviors that are preventing them from moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true for other people helping the student as well. Sitting down, there's a shared, as Sophie said, there was a shared conversation.
Yeah, and also, again, with the fact that it's dynamic and fluid rather than static, it's also a relief to understand that the places in which you may be stuck right now are, situational, are temporal in nature as well. Nobody need ever feel stuck in the inner ring. They may need never feel that they will be stuck in the inner ring without access to the more of the success attributes forever and in every situation. So this can start a good conversation as well. Well, in which classes do you feel most distracted? Right? In which settings, with which teachers do you feel most distracted? And what happens is that students begin to understand, oh, I'm not disorganized and distracted all the time in everything that I do. In fact, I do have some adequate control over that in certain situations and at certain times. And so goal setting can be related to time and place, not just sort of this overwhelming sense that many students coming out of our current educational model sort of feel debilitated by these labels that have been given to them that they may not fully understand and that feel profound as if they're always in that situation. So there's something about this wheel that speaks to students, I think, and parents too, that's hopeful. Because not only can you understand that you're not always stuck somewhere in every given situation, but in fact, where we actually, in the first year studies department, all professors now in first year studies are working with the 4 domains framework. And where we all conscientiously start the work is with the strengths that the students can identify on the wheel. Where do you feel that you're managing yourself adequately right now? And that will change too. But for students to begin to identify, oh, I'm actually, I'm a very resilient person, and I've got my stress under control, and I'm being mindful every day, right? But I'm having a little bit of trouble over here with my self-regulation, perhaps, or not necessarily because of an ADD diagnosis.
I have a lot of students also saying that they are very motivated to do well in school. It's a rare student that really doesn't want to do well in school. But they have no idea how to get there. And the wheel allows them to see some of the other dimensions of that process so they can pinpoint more exactly where the struggle is, what they can do. The inner ring becomes the most powerful part of this process. And as students are working with the wheel, we will hand out a wheel that has a grayed out inner ring. Once they become familiar with the language here, once we talk about various strategies, which actually give them a road to the outer ring, it really provides them with some hope that, oh, I don't have to be stuck here because there are actual things that address this particular barrier that will help me get to the place where I want to be in this moment. And they'll start with some of the language that we offer, apply it in different ways, but then at the end of the semester, we ask students to fill in their own strategies that they have found to be very useful over the term. And many of those strategies will fall into many of the different domains. So they'll find that office hours is really helpful in a lot of different ways. It'll help with motivation. It certainly helps keeping me organized. And it helps me with the academic skills. So they put office hours down several times. And they begin to personalize the wheel so that they can go back to it. The other thing that I really ask students to do is fill in all the spaces on the wheel, because as Sophie said, it's temporal, it's situational, and it's also task oriented. And anything, life always comes up, and students shouldn't feel like they can avoid situations where even even the most organized student can fall through the cracks at any given time if something interrupts their normal routine. So having strategies in their back pocket for those times make them feel much more in control and feel like they have something to look at and grab onto to get back on the track. They're less likely to be derailed for any long period of time if they know what those strategies are.
Right. And we do, in the first year studies department, we do a lot with goal setting. And actually, the original research in 2009, also one of the outcomes of that was what Dottie referred to earlier, was that students have these lofty goals. When you ask 18 and 19-year-olds who are at Landmark, possibly at college for the first time, what are your goals for yourself, right? The goals are sort of,
I want to get an A.
Broad and
Very
non-specific.
broad.
I want to pass, I want to get an A, right? The goal setting piece, the wheel and the framework and the 4 domains lend themselves to very specific, very individualized goal setting work. And we've developed a beautiful, like a worksheet, I guess you would call it, a template. Dottie figured out how to do this in Microsoft Word with drop-down bars. And so students can actually use the language of the wheel using drop-down bars in a Word document in which they begin to identify the primary barriers that they notice for themselves, very specific actions that they would like to take to begin to move toward the success attribute in the outer ring. And all of that language is provided in drop-down bars. And Dottie created this template so that it really distills down for students ultimately the creation of a new habit loop. And so using Duhigg's work on habit loop, students begin to understand the cycles that they've been in, where they've been rewarding themselves with negative outcomes. And then now they can use the language and the concepts that we've been working on throughout the term to begin to create a new and more positive habit loop for themselves, in which they focus on moving to the outer attributes on the ring.
They also have a really tangible way to assess their progress. It's really hard to assess what you're doing wrong if your goal is set at getting an A, because it's not specific enough in terms of action. And I find that to be really helpful.
Yeah. Another strength of the model is the flexibility in terms of ways it can be used in sort of different sorts of pairings and groupings. It can be used one-on-one, certainly. Counselors, advisors, teachers in office hour settings can pull out our framework and work with students individually. We've both used it first year studies. Professors are using it in both large and small groups in the classroom. At presentations that we work at conferences with students such as yourselves, we have professionals working with at-risk populations, grouping up and working with it. There's a lot to be learned from the wheel itself, just in terms of what professors and other people, professionals working with students, can understand about their students from this work. So separate from working with the student on the wheel, professors can begin to understand the dynamic of the makeup of their class based on some of what they're able to observe about their students. And for example, one of the big revelations that Dottie and I had around this work is what we call the critical mass student. So students for whom nothing seems to be helping them dig their way back out of a hole. We say, they've taken the same required courses 2 and 3 times. It's not resonating. We're not seeing changes in behavior, changes in pattern, changes in goal setting, right? And these are students who are just not making it. And so as professors who really care about their students, these are some of the toughest students. We just can't reach them. We all have those students that we just can't reach. And so what Dottie and I realize is this model helps to explain what we call the critical mass student. So when you have a student who has a critical mass of barriers in all 4 domains, this is the student that is just going to struggle the most and it may not be reachable. It's like there are too many fires to put out.
One direction I might give that kind of student is to find their primary barrier that the other ones are falling at risk from. And this will help them to sort of figure out what is it in your life that seems to interfere with your whole life. And chances are that one thing is creating other barriers in its way. And if you work on correcting that one thing, you may see progress in other areas. And that helps them to sort of take away the overwhelming nature of that critical mass and see their way out of that process. And students like that, it's really hard to be overwhelmed by, and it's hard for them to not feel overwhelmed. So whatever we can do to help them reduce that feeling is going to be beneficial for them. I always tell students when they're identifying their barriers to not make up barriers where there aren't any.
Right.
Just because there are 4 domains doesn't mean you need four barriers in each domain. And it's really critical for them to understand that, you know, just put your sights on the things that are the most impactful in your life and work from there. And you know, hopefully they'll get better, and they'll get to a point where they can begin working on the smaller barriers.
Right, and a final note is that our work with the 4 domains and the wheel, we've discovered that it works well with all diagnoses. So we have had successes in the classroom, especially with specific kinds of instruction that we've developed purposefully with the idea of the 4 domains in mind. We've had a lot of success working with students on the autism spectrum who are building sort of social connection, who are learning to take change a little bit easier, right? Dottie just wrote an excellent article about that. And of course, students with every other profile who we see, not just at Landmark College, but are now in all of your classrooms across the country. And certainly for students who are not necessarily at risk. This is a universal design model. Students who are succeeding and doing really well in my classes benefit from what we have to offer with the 4 domains just as much as students who may be really struggling.
I think the takeaway for me working through this model of discovery certainly is that students, it resonates with students, and they're able to begin the process of seeing themselves as complex learners. And all of these domains are for every learner. So even though they're at risk or in a particular population, all learners have to be able to manage these things, some better than others. The other takeaway for me is that for me, in terms of the law and accommodations at higher ed, it's my obligation as a teacher to provide access. And that means provide a lot of materials in a lot of different ways students can enter. But that didn't seem like enough to help students actually make gains. So that prompted our work with explicitly designed instruction that does not forfeit any content, but it provides very structured activities that students engage in, where they're not just learning the content area, but they're being asked to address some of these other skills and learn from other students that have those skills intact, so that they can actually make progress with the skills instead of just acknowledging them. They'll have ways to begin building those skills back up. And that was very important to certainly our first research, because we had students not engaging. Well, that's great to know, but what do we do about it? And we were looking for answers. What can we do about it? And I think the domains really address that in many ways for students.
Yeah, and finally we did in 2014, we did some informal collection within 3 or 4 FY classes. We surveyed 50 first-year students, sort of towards the last third of the course. in which we asked them to sort of rate their experience with our 4 domains of learning framework. And of the 50, I think it was all but one said it was very valuable. So we also asked FY professors who were using it to do the same thing. So our experience with student results on that sort of informal assessment was that it resonated with really all of the students in a positive way.
And on a final note, I think that one of the more powerful experiences I had were with parents in the room. And after we had presented the wheel to the parents, and in an effort to help them understand what students were learning in the classroom, we suggested to the parents to use some of the language, to use some of their understanding to engage in conversations that would actually promote support, beneficial support for students at this level, understanding that they should be supporting them in more adult ways, and stepping back and finding ways that they can encourage them without doing too much for them, and allowing them to grow. And the parents received that information so well, and they were very excited about the possibilities of that conversation with their student at the end. So it has a very broad reach and quite successful with really a lot of different populations.
Yeah. If you'd like to know more about our work, please use the contact link on our external website. We are happy to share our materials. We're happy to share our articles. And we would be very interested in coming to you. If you would like to have us come and give a workshop or give a presentation, we would be happy to do so. Please just get in touch with the contact page on our website. Thank you.